program is funded through grant dollars and provided at no cost to employers. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. And with that, I welcome Karen, and we'll turn it over to her to begin. Karen?
Thank you, Cindy. Welcome, everybody. We appreciate you taking the time today to join us. We're going to be talking about the rise in pedestrian vehicular incidents that we've seen both on a just general public standpoint and from an occupational standpoint. We talk a lot about driving, but we talk a lot about people behind the wheel when we're talking about occupational driving safety, but we are going to talk a little bit about how to keep those people outside of the vehicle safe. So what we'll cover today is some of the causes of pedestrian vehicular fatalities and things that you can do in your workplace and with your employees to safeguard them from these types of incidents. A variety of industries and occupations require people to drive work, but also require them to work around vehicles and be exposed to those hazards, and roadways and work zones are really dangerous. It's part of the workplace, and it's something that a lot of employers don't consider, so we really want you to think about the roadway as part of the workplace when you're developing your safety programs. It's important because 45% of the work-related fatalities in Texas happen because of transportation incidents. So, like I said, we're going to focus on employees outside of vehicles and those hazards. Here's some data from the Texas Department of Transportation. You can see that there's been a rise in both the number of collisions that involve pedestrians in our state over the years and a rise in the number of pedestrian fatalities. As a matter of fact, the Governor's Highway Safety Association recently published a report. In the United States, they looked at the counties with the largest numbers of pedestrian fatalities, and of the top 10, Texas had 3 counties in the top 10 counties in the nation: Harris, Dallas, and Bexar. Part of that is because of the sheer volume of people in those counties. There were a total of 3,773 fatalities from crashes in Texas in 2016. That's the latest data that's available. So about 11% of those are pedestrians that died. Now, there's a lot of things that can contribute to this rise in pedestrian fatalities. Those include distractions, both people driving being distracted and pedestrians trying to maneuver through the streets and intersections being distracted as well. With the more and more electric cars on the road, those don't have as much noise as a regular motor, and they're harder to hear. And so especially if people have their earbuds in and are listening to music, they don't always hear those kinds of vehicles approaching. There's just more traffic on the roads. I mean, Texas is a big state with a lot of people in it. More traffic, more pedestrians on the road. And then, of course, you have motorists and pedestrians who, pardon me, who aren't necessarily complying with traffic laws, crossing at crosswalks or, not yielding and that sort of thing. And interestingly, this Governor's Highway Safety Association report also mentioned that 80% of pedestrian fatalities occur after dark. So from a work-related standpoint, here's a concern that we've seen, again, 2016 being the last data available from the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics. We saw a 50% increase in pedestrian vehicular incidents that resulted in fatalities from 2015 to 16. And those occurred in a variety of locations: non-roadway, which could be a loading dock, parking lot, a warehouse, that sort of thing, in work zones, on the side of the road, or actually in the roadway. So this is in the big picture, 545 people died on the job in Texas in 2016, so this is a small percentage, but it was a big increase that we saw from the last year's data available to the current year's data. So it's something that we want to bring to the forefront and have people think about. First, we're going to talk about work zone safety. Obviously, work zones are dangerous for everybody involved, both the people working in the zone and motorists trying to traverse them. According to the Texas Department of Transportation, there were almost 26,000 crashes in construction zones in Texas in 2016. And you can see here, many of those resulted in fatalities or severe injuries or injuries that may not have been non-capacitating, but injuries nonetheless. Injuries mean people aren't well, and maybe even if it wasn't a work-related crash, if they get hurt in a crash and they're not at work, that does affect you as an employer. So two of the leading causes of, crashes in work zones are failure to control speed and inattention. So it's very important that you're reminding your employees that if they're having to drive around work zones or near work zones, that they're paying attention to those traffic signs and adhering to what they're saying, because they're important and they're there for a reason. Always slow down, follow the posted speeds. I know that's difficult to do when the traffic around you is not necessarily abiding by those speed limits. So try to do the best, have your employees try to do the best they can. Go with the flow of traffic, but try not to speed if possible. And, of course, it's always good to remember that traffic signs double in work zones. That's an important thing for people to remember. We want drivers to be paying attention always behind the wheel, especially in work zones. The employees might be right next to the roadway. There's going to be equipment, traffic control devices that are very close. Often the shoulder's non-existent within a work zone. So definitely paying attention is even more important than ever. Construction can cause delays. You need to have your employees plan ahead for that kind of thing. If they know that they have to drive for work and they're going to be traveling in an area where there are construction projects going on, it's best to avoid those if possible, but have them plan ahead and leave early ahead so they're not in there's no sense of urgency trying to get through the work zone and maybe go past those speed limits just because they're trying to get to their destination on time. If you are an employer that has employees working in a work zone where you actually set up work zones, you definitely want to make sure that the vehicles that you're using in your work zone are marked as such, so that makes them highly visible to other motorists, either with reflective markings or, chevrons or red or similar color, orange color, and making sure that the signage is clearly marked so people know what to expect, especially around curves and that sort over hills. Those people working in the work zones are obviously, like any other pedestrian that we're talking about today, they're going to lose the battle if they encounter a vehicle. They just don't have the protection. So it's really important for them to be aware of the traffic going on around them and the equipment in the work zone that can affect their safety. You definitely want to equip your employees with personal protective equipment, again, to make them highly visible to motorists. Not just your vehicles and everything in the work zone, but your employees should also be as visible as possible, including your flaggers. And if you aren't already following it, Texas has a manual on uniform traffic control that gives guidelines on how to set up a work zone and how to mark it so that motorists know what to expect. And it's available on the TxDOT website, so you can download that and look at it and make sure that you're following those things, especially well, not just big construction projects, but temporary work zones. There are a lot of utility work that happens that those employees have to temporarily close off part of a roadway. And I think we've all seen where, you know, there's one cone out and there's nothing set up to divert traffic readily, and you come up on it really quickly. So it's really important, especially in those temporary work zones, to make sure they're adequately marked so motorists know what to expect. Moving on to, you know, just kind of some reminders about what you can tell your employees if they encounter problems with their vehicle while they're on the road for you. It's important for them to have information with them, to know who to contact if they break down or have a crash. Obviously, they want to call 911 if there's an emergency. But it's good for them to put this information in their vehicle, make sure that they know how to get back in touch with their supervisor or their dispatch, let them know what's going on. The Texas Department of Public Safety has a phone number on the back of everybody's driver's license that is a stranded motorist hotline that people can call to get assistance if they're stranded on the side of the road. And also, DPS has some agreements set up with several cell phone providers. Most of the major ones like Alltel, Nextel, AT&T, Singular, Verizon, Sprint, US Cellular, and T-Mobile, where you can just dial *377, and that will get you to this helpline. So that's a good resource for people to use if they are stranded and need help, and you know, you don't have a wrecker on call, so to speak. Other things for employees to think about if they do encounter problems with their vehicle when they're driving. If the vehicle is equipped with flares, that's a good thing to try to alert other motorists that the vehicle is stranded. People generally will equate flares with an accident, and they'll be alert to them. You definitely want employees to use their flashers, raise the hood of the car so it's obvious to people that there's something wrong with the vehicle. Cones or other reflective materials are good to put out around the vehicle. Employees should really think about what they're wearing if they're stranded. So obviously, light-colored clothing is going to be more visible to other motorists. If you have people that travel regularly, you might want to equip them with a reflective vest to put in the trunk of the car or the vehicle so they can have it in case they do break down. They can put that on. It brings more attention as well. If they're under an overpass, it's best to try to stay completely under the structure, because sometimes vehicles passing over the overpass might be rubbernecking, trying to look below and see what's going on, which could cause problems, additional problems that they don't want. If they do have car trouble, and if at all possible, try not to stop at the crest of a hill or around curves where motorists coming up to the scene where their car is can't see them very well and are on them without realizing it. So have them try to move their vehicles to a safe location. You don't want to stand next to your vehicle or in front or behind your vehicle. If you're stranded on the side of the road, definitely either stay in the vehicle or have them exit the vehicle and get well away from the roadway if they're going to want to stand outside the vehicle to wait for help. You don't want to be around the car, because if somebody doesn't see them or see the car, realize it's stranded and hits it, they're going to be involved in that incident as well. We talk a lot about not driving distracted. You know, it's definitely important, but it's also important for your employees to not be distracted while they're doing their job around vehicles, even if they're not the driver. Distracted pedestrians don't hear or see what's going on around them. They're not going to know that vehicles are approaching. So if you have a policy about not using cell phones while driving, that's great, but you might want to implement that policy for other safety-sensitive positions or duties, including work that needs to be done around motor vehicles. The Governor's Highway Safety Association says that in 2016, the number of smartphones in active use was 262 million, and that's compared to 78 million in 2010. So that's not that many years ago, and the number of people using cell phones is just dramatically increased. So you might want to think about what you're telling your employees about using their cell phones on the job around motor vehicles. Again, some of those areas we talked about, loading docks, parking lots, you know, if they're broken down on the side of the road, if they have to work in the roadway. Pardon me, on the way back from lunch, I saw a surveyor who was parked on the shoulder, and he was in it was a 4-lane divided highway, and he was in the center median setting up his equipment so he could complete his surveying task, but he had to cross those 2 lanes of this busy highway to get to that point. You definitely don't want, I mean, that's the only way to get there, but you definitely don't want somebody distracted while they're trying to do that job or trying to cross a roadway. Just some other tips for safety from our friends at the CDC. Again, we just talked about electronic devices. Try to cross at designated crosswalks, definitely. We talked about reflective clothing, and stay on the sidewalk or walk on the shoulder and face traffic so you can see what's coming. We talked a little bit now about forklifts. If you have forklifts in your workplace, and this, you know, could include sit-down forklifts, stand-up forklifts, rough terrain, order pickers, clamp trucks, powered pallet jacks, and tugs. These are all applicable for these types of tips here. It's really important that you have your forklift drivers trained and certified to operate that equipment. And make sure they follow tips like being aware of pedestrians. They should give pedestrians the right of way. You should never let anybody ride on a forklift outside of the seat that it was made, or the plate where you're meant to stand on if it's a standing forklift. You want to keep your workplace clear of clutter and obstacles for pedestrians. You don't want them to have to go around things and get into the path of a forklift just to get where they need to go in the workplace. And definitely don't want people who are going to be potentially crushed between a forklift and a hard surface, as it says here. A forklift is a motor vehicle. It has horns, mirrors, lights, and other equipment to let people know that it's in operation, so make sure your operators are using those. And if they do need to proceed and pedestrians are in the vicinity, that they make eye contact or some kind of gesture so they know who's going next, who's got the right of way. It's really optimum for you to designate areas in your workplace for pedestrians specifically and for forklifts specifically so that there's not any confusion about which is supposed to go where. That's optimum, and there are lots of different devices out there for traffic control within a workplace that uses forklifts. So these are just some tips, hopefully giving you some food for thought on some exposures that your employees might have when it comes to being around motor vehicles. As we always say, driving and being around vehicles is probably one of the most dangerous things that your employees are ever going to do. And you should equip them and make it the best possible chance of them getting home in the same way that they came to work. So with that concludes our discussion today, and I want to share some resources with you. Our agency has lots of driving safety and pedestrian safety related information on our website that we've sort of put together an easy access location for people to find resources to help with their training needs and educational needs for their employees. Here's our information here. If you carry workers' compensation insurance, your insurance company is required by Texas law to provide help to you as a policyholder when you have safety issues. So on the front of your policy, there should be a phone number for you to call to contact their loss control department. I recommend that you contact them and ask them for their help too. They're there to help you prevent losses. Texas Department of Transportation has lots of data and resources available to people to help them with some of these perils, and they have lots of campaigns and campaign materials that are helpful and useful if you want to inform employees. Obviously, you're aware of our driving concern program because you're involved on this presentation, so that's always a good resource. And now I'll open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions, you can type it into the chat, and I'll read that aloud and try to answer it as best I can. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so here is my contact information. The Division of Workers' Compensation has a team of trainers that we can come to your workplace and provide training. We have training materials on our website. We have a library of DVDs that you can check out for free. So we, certainly invite you to use those. Contact us at any time if you need help with your safety program. And I appreciate everybody's attendance today. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for being with us today. We greatly appreciate the information that you shared with us. Hopefully, this will help employers keep employees safer. We appreciate attendees taking a few minutes to complete the post-event survey. And with that, this concludes the webinar. Have a good day.